جوزي شفته بعيني، يعني جوزي كيف مات.
Sabira had a lovely life here, living amongst the rocks and the water. Yet all that was about to change on one fateful day when her husband went out fishing like he did most mornings.
قد ما صرخ قول لهم عبد الله عبد الله.
Abdullah was Sabira Ali Thani's husband of 14 years.
طلعنا لقوه عايم بالمي، الدم حوالي 15 متر داير من داره مربع، كان الدم عم يطلع منه.
When he died, so too did the life she knew.
عايش بنعيم، بحس حالي أنا وماشي طايرة على الأرض، بس لما توفى زوجي حسيت سكرت الدنيا بوجهي.
Perched below the upscale apartments and cliffside cafes of Beirut's exclusive Raouche neighborhood is one of the city's most prominent natural landmarks, Pigeons Rock. Adjacent to them is a public area called Dalieh, a popular spot for Beirut families to swim, fish, or enjoy the city's shoreline. This is where Sabira lived with her husband, sons, and grandson in this tiny shack her family constructed with whatever supplies they could find. Dalieh has been home to 5 generations of the Itani family, who claim to have settled here more than a century ago, living in caves and seaside shacks, making their living off the water. 53-year-old Sabira became little Abdullah's main caregiver after his mother left when he was just 5 months old.
حياة صعبة، تعذبت كتير يعني لربيت أولادي. ما بحب أحكي فيها السيرة.
Despite the difficulties, Dalieh is where Sabira spent her happiest days.
أنا خلقت هون وربيت هون، عشت على البحر. هون بتذكر طفولتي، إنه كيف كنا نلعب ونركض على الصخور وننزل نجيب سمك، ننظف السمك ونقليه دغري، ناكله سمك طازة طالع من المي.
It was here in Dalieh where Sabira met and married her husband Abdullah in 1979. They caught and sold fish for a living.
يشتغل هو بالبحر وساعده أوقات أنا، لأنه كان لما يجيب السمك انزل اسرح معه أنا أوقات تسلايي، ياخدني معه، يجيب لي السمك بعله إياهم. كان عندي جيراني كلها تاخد منا سمك، يعرفوا صياد سمك طازة، ياخدوا منا سمك، أنا بعله السمك.
Sabira went from simply accompanying her husband out at sea to becoming the first woman to be granted a business license to fish along the Lebanese coast in 1996. A big deal given Lebanon's male-dominated society, which see men as the economic provider.
أنا لما كنت أسرح مع زوجي بالبحر، المرة الوحيدة كنت أسرح، ما في نسوان شوفها تنزل. هون الصيادة كلهم بيحبوني وبيقولوا لي أخت الرجال. وهلأ صاروا تقريباً في هون حوالي 30 عائلة مع الأيام، يعني بلشوا يجوا. قاموا قصوا منهم وهلأ نحن بعدنا، بس نحن أقدم عالم هون.
Life was peaceful, but one day in 2011 changed Sabira's life completely. The day she watched her husband die when a big yacht collided into Abdullah's small fishing boat, killing him. She was now the sole breadwinner for her family. Fishing, a skill Abdullah had left her with, was now her lifeline. The local restaurants and fish markets that she and Abdullah had built relationships with bought her daily catch. She and her brother bought a boat together and even built a small cafe in Dalieh.
هلا لما يكون معنا نحط شباك وقفاص نسرح بالمي، ناخد رحلات بالمراكب على 4 مغارات تحت الصخرة، هدول بيساعدونا شوي بمعيشتنا.
Sabira pulled herself together after her husband's death, but only a few years later, her world would be rocked again. Following the country's devastating 15-year civil war, reconstruction of the country saw Lebanon's Mediterranean coastline and other public spaces eaten up by wealthy investors. For a while, Delier was a rare survivor. Having been under custodianship since Ottoman times, no building was allowed to be built here. The land was reserved for the public to farm and fish. In fact, all of Lebanon's coastline is considered public land in its constitution. But legal lines have been blurred. In the 1990s, Lebanon's political dynasty, the Hariri family, which produced many Lebanese politicians, including 2 prime ministers, was granted the right to develop waterfront properties, including Delier, in exchange for the building of roads and parks.
بيقولوا إنه بده يفتحوا مشروع هون، بده يعملوا مشروع الصخرة واليمامة. نسمع نحن من ناس إنه بده يشيلونا. نحن مثل السمكة، وين بدها تروح؟
In 2014, Delier, now owned by the Hariri family's development company, Solidaire, was fenced off and construction equipment moved in, ready to build over the memories of generations.
هيدي كل حياتي، هيدي طفولتي وزواجي وولادي وعائلتي. ما في، كل حياتي هي الأرض هون، ما فيني أقعد بلاها. بحبها كتير هالأرض وما فيني أقعد بلاها صدقني.
Sabira and her family fought hard to stay, even renovating their home to show investment. But the developers were firm. Eventually, every single resident of Delier moved out.
Many of the houses and cafes in this area have all been leveled by bulldozers. As you can see, it's just the debris that remains and some items of clothing and other knickknacks that the families have left behind.
Many of the families accepted the financial compensation offered to them, leaving behind old clothing and leftover piping as the only remnants of what was once a thriving fishing community. Today, it is estimated that roughly 170 kilometers of the country's 225-kilometer Mediterranean coast has been privatized, despite the constitution stating it as public land. A development frenzy, much of it illegal, has wiped out much of the country's craggy natural shoreline, replacing it with upscale resorts where entrance fees or family meals can easily exceed Lebanon's $450 minimum monthly wage.
حرام كثير لأنه العالم ما بقى تقدر تفوتها لأنه كثير غلا. يعني إذا واحد عنده ولدين وبده يروح على مسبح بده يحط 500,000. نتمنى تتغير الأوضاع للأفضل، نتمنى من هالعالم يتطلع فينا شوي، نتمنى من هون الحكام يحسوا فينا شوي. العالم كلها اختنقت، العالم كلها تعبت.
Finding public place other than this one is so hard. Lately, with the expansion of hotels and the resorts, we rarely find a public place to fish in. This is the only vacant place, and a few days ago I was thinking if they made some resort here, where would we go?
A 2012 report by the Ministry of Public Works and Transport stated that only 40 kilometers, less than 20% of Lebanon's coastline, was still public, and half of that is not geographically accessible. Furthermore, many residents argue that what has been left to the public has been neglected.
من 30 سنة كان هون الشاطئ بياخذ العقل، النظافة، الترتيب، العالم تجي من كل لبنان تجي تسبح. هلا تطلع كيف كله زبالة وقرف وما في حدا. هلا ما يعني انه بتطلع على البحر ما إلك قلب تحط اصبعك فيه. كله تلوث وكله مجارير وكله قرف.
The irony, it's a really beautiful place, but the garbage is all around and the people don't take care of it because it's public. Everything that's public, it's abandoned. There has to be garbage bins. I mean, there is nothing that helps you.
In response to the lack of municipality support, civil society has stepped up. Nahnoo is a non-profit organization fighting to protect Lebanon's public spaces. After 2 years of grassroots efforts, Nahnoo's pressure on decision-makers led to a major breakthrough.
After campaigning for years for the protection of Delier, through public discussions with the decision-makers, grassroots events on the spot, finally, I would say around 2016, the project of construction was frozen.
Delier is now open to the public once again, but other previously public spaces continue to be threatened by development. The country's current economic woes has halted some other projects, but the land still belongs to the developers.
The Dali is for now open and safe, but not saved yet. But of course, the most important is to change the law to protect the coast. And this will actually be a sustainable way to keep the coast accessible, inclusive, open for all.
But reform can be difficult, especially when many of the developers have influential backers.
All of these owners have conflict of interest because some of them are actually in parliament or in government, and this leads to the fact that they can change the law to benefit their own interest. This is corruption at the end.
Soledad is now reclaiming close to 800,000 square meters from the sea for a new Beirut development called Zaytuna Bay, a marine club home to multi-million-dollar yachts, the very same kind that killed Sabira's husband.
People were not okay with this. They want to keep their beaches, they want to keep their coasts, they want to keep a space for their kids to play safely, to be able to enjoy the sea.
Beyond that, some feel it also widens the socio-economic divides in Lebanon.
The more we privatize, the more we isolate each other, the more we become separated. The public spaces hold a lot of power in creating unity, in creating community. Any building that will come and sit here in the space will be for certain people.
We are a country by the sea, but the young generation is not growing with this culture like their older generation because they're not able to access. And this is a big part of our identity, and if we're losing that, so we're losing part of our identity as well.
Today, Sabira and her family live up the coast in a new area. Yet, now at 60 years old, Sabira continues to go out fishing every morning and sell her catch at a local fish market. Sabira's life by the sea may have been turbulent, but she has no plans to leave.
بقبل راس بيروت بالذات شو بده يعملوا فيه؟ معودين لأنه خلقنا هون وربينا بالبحر، عايشين بالبحر نعم. حياة حلوة.
For Assignment Asia, I'm Natalie Carney in Beirut.
وينك طاير؟